He tried to make a sexual advances on me, and suddenly, forcefully as well. The fact that it was a professor, like someone who was supposed to teach me, who was supposed to be professional, it was really horrifying. I found out later that he did something way worse to another student.
A professor from the National University of Singapore has been dismissed.
And a US student has been arrested for allegedly installing a hidden camera in a female toilet on campus.
The National University of Singapore, one of Singapore's oldest institutes for higher learning, has now come under fire for its handling of sexual abuse cases. According to an official report published by the university, there were a total of 90 reported complaints against sexual misconduct between 2016 to 2020. Reported cases peaked in 2019 at 25 complaints, almost double the number in 2018.
I remember that there were a few students who received sexual advances from their professors, but I also know that there are a lot of unreported cases that don't go to the police or the press, and they just kind of stay within the school. I think a lot of cases go unreported to the press or the police is because the university would try to keep everything about these cases within the university. They're trying to protect the reputation, or they try to convince the students that it's better to keep it within the school so the school has control. When I was going to report it to the school, I first was terrified because I've seen how the university's treatment of other sexual assault survivors, and I was really, really worried that our case would be disregarded. We decided to report the case to the university because we didn't want it to happen to other students, because we kind of saw that there was a pattern. This is the first email I sent on Jeremy Fernando to Tembusu College. I explained everything, described all of the events, and asked them to spare no effort in seeking justice for us. They were pretty helpful up until the university filed a police report on our behalf without our consent. So the way I found out that the university made a report to the police on our case was actually through the news, I think. I was working full-time at a restaurant during that period. I kind of broke down during the service. I had to leave the restaurant in the middle of it. Triggered a panic attack. It just felt like such a betrayal, especially during such a hard time when we've already been through something traumatic. That kind of just made it worse, because the one institution that's supposed to take responsibility and help us did something that made us feel more powerless, actually.
According to an official report, the university is required by law to report any arrestable offences, which include voyeurism, outrage of modesty, and rape. The university also provided a detailed timeline of its internal investigations on Jeremy Fernando and actions it took, such as barring him from making contact with students, as well as assigning victim care officers to the victims.
Personally, I would say that in terms of the responses by NUS regarding, crimes of sexual violence, it's improving now. But I think just one thing on my end that I feel is not very addressed there is the victim survivor support. The Jeremy Fernando case is one of the other instances where it shows an ineffective response from the university's front in terms of reporting on behalf of students. While it's understood that it is something that they have to do as an institutional response, But in terms of victim survivors, at least, you snatch away the autonomy that they have on their personal experiences, and it kind of, to some extent, impedes their healing process because they are already going through something so traumatic.
Following several reports of sexual abuse, school officials from the university have assured students that more measures will be taken to address incidents of sexual violence on campus. In 2019, a victim care unit was set up to support student victims of sexual violence. This happened in 2018 after an undergraduate shared her traumatic experience of being filmed in the dormitory bathroom on social media, resulting in a wave of public backlash.
I think like ultimately for Safe NUS, it's really a victim survivor centric. Our approach is always on that. It's always to put a survivor forward. And I think for us also, one key focus that we look at is really transformative. Ultimately, you can punish a perpetrator as much as you want, but you don't eradicate the crime. Right.
Safe NUS was founded in 2019 by a group of students, and this was actually after Monica Bay's incident. That is where Safe NUS wanted to step up in, because we felt that ultimately providing safe spaces for victim survivors to reach out, to confide in, or to help them, if let's say they wish to report, they could be assured that Safe NUS would be there with them throughout.
Between the time that the university reported our cases to the police and me going to the police, I was receiving a lot of concerned messages from my victim care officer. Over here it says, if reporting is too much for you at this point, you don't have to feel pressured. But if making the report for yourself helps, feel free to. I was told many times that I could make it at my own pace. And shortly after this, I found out that the university made the police report on my behalf.
A polygraph test, or a lie detector test, was used by the police during the investigation process.
The issue with the polygraph apparently is that they only use it in times when they cannot ascertain who is telling the truth. And because what happened between me and Jeremy Fernando was kind of he said, she said, they used the polygraph as the solution to it. The whole process is very clinical, it's very cold. So throughout the whole time with the polygraph, I was really nervous and scared. And what that did was change the results of the test a lot, according to the polygrapher, who said the test was botched. Putting a survivor of sexual assault through that is actually a deeply scarring experience, because it kind of feels like your bodily integrity is always being watched in this entire process, and making them question what their true motivations were for being with their abuser was, whether or not they truly wanted to be physical or intimate with them. This entire episode actually did a big number on my studies. After what happened with Jeremy Fernando in the beginning stages, I took a leave of absence from university, which lasted until January last year. So it was a really, really big struggle when I decided to cut my degree short to 3 years. I wasn't ready to stay in the university, but I also really wanted the thesis and to complete a 4-year honors degree. So I was like kind of trapped in an impossible situation. Doing an honors thesis or doing my 4th year would have been amazing, because I kind of always wanted to do academia. Literature is the thing that I love the most in the world, actually. I feel that like I could have been more mentally and emotionally stable enough to get through all of this if the university was just more responsible with what happened to us. Really was like a chain of events that led to this.
So hi everyone, welcome to our next episode of Safe Space Podcast. So your host today is definitely Andrea and I. And today we'll be discussing an introduction to violence.
So I think a lot of us, when we first think about the word violence, we think about physical violence, you know.
The podcast series, at least, was something established by our literacy team. So it is ultimately a conversation between me, the team leader, and a guest speaker, whoever we invite based on the topic. We kind of realized that people listen to podcasts on the go. That's why we decided to launch this podcast series, at least. Ultimately, to ensure that there is increased awareness and increased accessibility to resources.
Ultimately, to enact the change or to enact the reform, one has to be able to recognize the violence itself, because many times, we are in the structure, we're in the system, we are so used to it that we think that it's the norm and it's completely fine.
The fight for sexual violence never ends. For that reason, we need to have safe spaces, inclusive spaces. We hope that Safe NUS carries on this legacy and expands in such a way that we can be that next, organization that is really very centric towards the youth and the students, to increase awareness of sexual violence, to increase advocacy against sexual violence, and holding perpetrators accountable and providing victim survivors with relevant support avenues and channels. We have actually launched a warm line. So this warm line is actually a Discord server where victim survivors, can just log in and, reach out to us and, speak to us for emotional support, for psychological support, and of course some advice, if let's say they wish to report what had happened to them. Respondents who are on the call, they have gone for like a trauma-informed training, a mental health training, sexual assault first responders training, so that they are equipped with relevant skills to support these victim survivors. And this entire call is actually anonymous. Ultimately, the fight against sexual violence, the more avenues that we have, the more support bases that we have, it's obviously welcomed for.
It was really, really difficult in the first few months. After about a year or so, a year and a half, things started getting a lot better. I've gone past processing what happened, and I realized that this is a very deeply systemic issue. This will continue happening as long as the institution doesn't change. I think for survivors, the important thing is to remember that all of this is a constant challenge. It takes a lot of bravery to speak up, especially when something very traumatic has happened to you. And that it will save a lot of heartbreak if you understand that the people who are supposed to have your back often don't. But you can channel that injustice and that energy into making sure that you are heard, that justice is found in whatever way works for you. It's what needs to be done, not just for you, but for the women who may come after you, who you may want to protect or ensure that these things don't happen to them as well.